Hello and welcome. You are tuned in to Renegade Files, your underground connection to paranormal adventures, unsolved mysteries, and strange culture. I'm your host, Lex Gordon, broadcasting from the Jungle Villa Outpost, deep in the uncharted tropics. This is Renegade Files episode 131, The Creepy Clown Panic, Phantom Clowns and Public Hysteria. There's a certain irony in the idea of clowns being dangerous. In simple terms, we think of clowns as funny, entertaining, and harmless. So, when a clown adopts a menacing or frightening appearance, we're forced to reconcile two conflicting paradigms. And every once in a while, a certain idea just has its 15 minutes of fame. We love trends, hot topics, and buzz. Sometimes, a paradigm conflict collides with something visual to ignite a trend. If that trend simultaneously elicits a powerful enough fear, rational or not, we may very well get a full-blown panic. The creepy clown panic was just such a perfect storm of shocking, ironic imagery, irrational fears, and theatrical creepiness. Born on the network news, spread by social media, and perpetuated by copycats, for a hot minute in 2016, the killer clowns had their day. On this episode of Renegade Files, we explore this most unlikely moment in American media, when people were actually afraid to leave their homes because they might see someone dressed as a clown in an incongruous setting. We'll dive into the history of the trickster archetype, look at clowns as more than just court jesters, and try to understand how the creepy clown sighting phenomenon even became a thing. Then we'll explore the highest profile and most unsettling cases of the 2016 clown panic. Finally, we'll analyze how real-world clown-related crimes and creepy clowns of fiction both helped drive the Phantom Clown Panic to its peak. So come with me now, my fearless friend, and together we will face the frightening phenomenon of the creepy clown panic of 2016. Creepy clown panic of 2016. Creepy clown panic of 2016. Support this show at therenegadefiles.com. That one location has all things Renegade Files, like bonus episodes on Patreon, cool merchandise, every episode, all in one spot. therenegadefiles.com. Part 1. Creepy Clown History and the Trickster Folklore Archetype. The clown as a character can be traced back to the earliest written works. We find jesters and clowns in ancient Greek tales. The court jester we know from medieval times was much more than a silly joker employed to entertain. Often, the jester would deliver official news to the court in funny ways. This was a clever strategy of the nobility, who would use the jester and his humor to soften unpopular news. For example, a jester might tell of a new tax to be levied on farmland as a necessary evil to fund soldiers to protect those farms, and present it in a comical way that made light fun of the use of such funds. The jokes were a way to acknowledge any opposition to the process, but the tax would go into effect nonetheless. The character of Harlequin was a trickster clown in a 16th century Italian play, and this is where we get the earliest depictions of a hat with bells, pointy shoes, and a diamond checkered outfit. Harlequin was unpredictable, amoral, dishonest, and mischievous, but also funny and entertaining. In the 1700s, and I think into the 1800s, there was a popular traveling sideshow character called Punch. Punch appeared in circuses, puppet shows, and those sort of traveling performances that would go from town to town. Of course, different shows performed various versions of the story of Punch, but the main ones were a really weird mixture of comedy and horror, where Punch would perform funny physical stunts, but also verbally and physically abuse his wife, and even go so far as to kill people. He was described as a gleeful madcap character who was also a horrible villain. I'm pretty sure that the character must have influenced the creation of the Joker in the Batman comics and movies. In the novel The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens in 1836, there's an alcoholic clown who, while maybe not a bad guy, is definitely an unhappy character. And there are other instances of bad vibe clowns in entertainment history. Between 1880 and 1890, there was a French play and an Italian opera, both with a clown murderer as the bad guy. Both of the writers accused the other of plagiarism. So the point of all this is that clowns haven't always been purely cheerful. There's a long history of clowns and jesters as being everything from sad or sarcastic to outright deadly. Clowns as villains and bearers of bad news have populated fiction as far back as the oldest books and plays. So, when modern clowns began to emerge as potentially dangerous, the collective subconscious had a rich history upon which to draw. Part 2. The Clown Panic. Before we dive into this part, I just want to say that I had originally planned to go over the events and sightings that became what we now call the Phantom Clown Panic, which is what they originally called it, but also the Killer Clown Panic and most recently the Creepy Clown Panic. Those are all references to the same moment in time. The point is, I had originally planned to cover all that and then later in the episode, in a separate section, go over the scary clown fiction and the real clown crimes we know of, and the ways that these things added fuel to the panic fires. But as I was working on this episode, I started to realize that some of these, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but some of these real clown crimes and also some of the scary clowns in pop culture fiction seem like they had real-time influences on several clown panic events, or at least they coincided with the chronological unfolding of all of that. And these situations, in some cases, unfolded in ways that are far more tied to the event than I had initially thought before I started digging deeper into this story. So if I put all the real stuff and the TV or movie stuff at the end, then I end up jumping back and forth, or at least referring back and forth. So I think that what we'll do is dispense with the separate scary clown fiction and real clown crime section at the end, and just cover each of those particular facets as we come to them along the way as this phenomenon grew into what it became. So this strategy brings us right into the worst of it, which was John Wayne Gacy, who was first arrested back in 1968 when he was convicted of molesting a teen boy, the son of a prominent Chicago politician. But he only served 18 months of what was actually a 10-year sentence. So not exactly a slap on the hand, but he sort of got, at least he was put back out into society. He followed that release with a string of attempted and successful assaults on teen boys who worked for him at his construction company. And believe me, this is the short version of that. There's a lot in between. And we know about the ones who got away from the trials that came with his subsequent arrest in 1978 in connection with another missing teenager. Gacy was convicted and sentenced to the death penalty in 1980. Through the trial, which was covered heavily in the news at the time, we found out that Gacy had done in at least 33 young men. The news latched onto the fact that while working with the local JCs, Gacy had been a clown where he had performed at hospitals and a few parties. This juxtaposition added a sensational layer of creepiness to the whole already entirely terrible story, and it just got folded into the whole thing. Gacy's foray into being a clown had very little, if anything, to do with his actions as a serial murderer, but it was made a part of the story by the mainstream media. The story of Gacy's arrest, trial, and conviction was always aligned with the fact that he had been a clown, and pictures of him as a clown ran with the news over and over. This put the idea of a clown being dangerous in the real world into the mind of the public, and it became a precursor to the full-blown clown panic, which started to get legs at the same time. It isn't the only thing that caused it, which we will see, but it definitely had a role to play, no doubt. So this leads us into a weird aside, I think, but it's worth going into because it sets the stage for the background of the collective consciousness of the day. There was this first wave of digital computer animation, or at least some kind of rotoscope painting over live action footage, that was employed to suggest or stand in for what art directors and cinematographers at the time imagined digital computer animation would eventually look like. So it's weird, but so much of what we think of as early computer animation was actually mechanical special effects used to approximate what they thought, or I guess hoped, CGI might someday become. This gets into the whole the illusion as the illusion aspect of TV and movies in general, and I know it's a strange stretch, but just stick with me here, because this was the same era as a sort of new breed of pop entertainer as statesman. We have film actor Ronald Reagan, who was one of the most popular governors in California history, and he goes on to be president. And a strange confluence happens here. This early digital, or at least digital approximation of animation, gave us the Max Headroom character, you may recall, who was used in Coca-Cola ads and then went into MTV music video hosting, I think. And that Max Headroom personality had this sculpted, almost plastic mannequin look, especially the hair. It wasn't really animation, but it was animated. Then we get President Ronald Reagan. And I know it's weird, but he seemed to have a similar, like, perfectly sculpted hair, movie makeup looks. So this almost artificial, because it was too perfect look. But at the same time, a seamless, rehearsed, perfect delivery that came across as almost like animatronic. And this is to say nothing of like him as a president, good, bad, or indifferent. It's just the way that he appeared in media was very clean and polished and slicked back, at least in the early years of his presidency. A very television savvy type of a president, because he was literally a television and movie actor. And especially this stood out at the time. So there was this weird overlap, at least in my mind. I know, maybe I'm way out on a limb here, but it seems like there was this weird overlap of the creative products of Hollywood with the real world of politics. And it all just started to merge somehow. Like later in the 2000s, Arnold Schwarzenegger, another actor turned politician, became the governor of California. So we get into this novel situation where there starts to be this blurring effect between what's real and what's Hollywood, what's makeup and what's lighting, and can we believe our eyes anymore? And the clown is the extreme version of the made-up, disguised performer. His smile is painted on. His surprised eyebrows are made a permanent expression with makeup, and in some weird way, and this is just my theory again, this fake clown persona starts to be mirrored by the political elite of the day. even if subliminally on the viewer part. Are we watching a president or a governor deliver a political speech, or are we watching an actor read from a script? This is a very real confusion that arises because this crossover of archetypes happens. So if a bodybuilder action hero can be the governor, and a polished, rehearsed film actor can be the president, then can a circus clown be a villain, a danger, or even a murderer? Just because the politician says he wants to help you doesn't mean he really does. Just because the clown has a painted-on smile doesn't mean he's harmless. This kind of juxtaposition carries immense psychological weight, and that weight gives it momentum. We got into the idea of the unsettling aspects of something that looks on the surface to be friendly, but is in reality dangerous, on episode 90, Indrid Cold, the creepy smiling man of modern folklore. Go back and check it out. The Smiling Man is an entire horror tributary of his own, but his sinister smile is related to the deadly clown motif for sure. So, in the midst of this very odd, but at least somewhat impactful blending of political posturing and emerging special effects, we see the satanic panic of the 80s branch out here, and that includes some bizarre clown connections or sightings, and these things sort of get connected, maybe just subliminally, to the historical narratives of what I can guess we can call the dark side of clowns. Like in one or two of the daycare satanic accusations, there was a staff member or two that dressed up as a clown here and there. It never became a big part of those stories, but it was more of a side note. But in Boston, 1981, there came a string of reports called into police stations by both parents and in some cases school kids themselves, saying that someone was dressed as a clown and driving around in a white van and trying to abduct school kids. This might have been the first instance of some kind of creepy clown on the loose that was reported in the news. At some point, the Boston Public School District sent out a letter to parents warning them to be watchful because there had been reports of clowns attempting to abduct kids into vans with promises of candy. Now, that sounds crazy cliche nowadays, but this is where the cliche originated, or at least in part. This prompted a flood of calls over the coming weeks, and police started profiling clowns and pulling over innocent party entertainers dressed as clowns. So like college kids in acting school at their side job as a clown on their way to a kid's birthday party. Like, whoop whoop, they get pulled over. You know, why you dressed as a clown, buddy? As far as I could find, there was never an instance of a clown abducting anyone in Boston at that time. The whole thing was more about the fear of that happening. Right after this, and it's maybe a tiny footnote, but in 1982, we have the Spielberg film Poltergeist. That has a scene where a kid's clown doll goes rogue and tries to pull, I think, the little brother under the bed. One of the first instances in a modern movie, modern at the time, of a clown being scary. Then in 2014, the creepy clowns make a big comeback. This would be what we now look at in hindsight as the genesis of the creepy clown panic of 2016. A string of clown sightings plagued the city of Wasco, California, when a scary-looking clown with balloons was seen and photographed for a few weeks in conspicuous places, like next to the town welcome sign, or at a bus stop, or outside of closed supermarkets at night. Late-night radio talk shows started taking calls from people who had seen the Wasco clown. An Instagram page was filled with photos, and copycats started showing up all over the place. It lasted for a few months, then the activity faded out. I think what they finally figured out was that the Wasco, California clown was some kind of off-the-wall visual art project perpetrated by a couple. Like, the guy would dress up as the clown and the girl would take pictures of him in these weird places. And it was meant to be creepy, but they were doing it as a sort of photographic art project. And people would be passing by and see it and take their own pictures, and the thing just sort of got out of control. But fast forward 2 years to 2016, another businessman who became a TV personality through his reality show, Donald Trump, becomes president. And we have this new version of a celebrity who is now the president. And much like we had with Ronald Reagan, we start to see a blurring of the lines between Hollywood performance and politics. Then on August 1st in 2016, Green Bay, Wisconsin, someone snapped a photo of an out-of-place clown at 1 a.m. along a wall at the top of an otherwise empty parking garage. And this image is one of the creepiest pictures ever taken, or at least that I've ever seen. I mean, believe me, it is a really creepy picture. This is a picture from the side. It's a little bit from the back, a fully bald white head and face, black eyebrows, sinister black grin, big nose, holding a cluster of black helium balloons, wearing an old tattered ruffled clown smock. It's lit in that beautiful but unsettling amber glow of the old sodium vapor street lamps. And it is a straight up scary image. You can see it in the Dark Intel files on our Patreon page. Jump in there for free and you can check it out. You can find it other places too. I always give you that out. Maybe I shouldn't. The only place in the world you can see this picture is on Patreon. That is not true. But anyway, I would appreciate the support if you jump in there. No one knew who this person was or why they were dressed like this creepy clown at 1 a.m. in an empty parking garage. But that picture went viral from a Facebook post. And pretty soon, other pictures of what looked like the same clown started to show up. He was seen under an overpass, on a bridge, and again in another parking garage, I think a couple times, all around Green Bay, Wisconsin, in the wee hours of the morning. Then a Facebook page appeared with a whole bunch of photos of this same creepy clown, and it said that the clown's name was Gags, G-A-G-S. The locals started to freak out, and the police were flooded with calls whenever Gags showed up somewhere. People were saying he was a serial killer. They were saying he was a ghost, a phantom, some kind of demon. Local news stories ran the photos, and the stories were picked up by bigger outlets like CBS and Fox. The local police issued a blanket letter telling people not to approach Gags, the possibly dangerous clown, to keep kids inside at night. And the letter suddenly sparked debates about public safety. Then it was revealed that the entire thing had been a marketing stunt to promote a low-budget, B-grade horror movie called Gags the Clown, and in some cases called just Gags. And it's about a reporter trying to find the identity of a killer clown terrorizing a town. But even though it was discovered that Gags the Clown had been set up to promote a movie, the news never really reported the fact that that was the case as enthusiastically as they had reported the original story of a mysterious, possibly dangerous clown on the streets. So the Gags the Clown panic faded on its own more than it was actively debunked by the news. Because of this, the public never really got the explanation or relief from the whole thing. I mean, a little bit, but the story of some random creepy clown, it was already out there. It's like one of my favorite quotes, right? A lie will walk a mile before the truth gets its boots on. Like that. So right after the Gags the Clown panic, we have a situation in Greenville County, South Carolina, where what was at first one kid and then others reported to their parents that they had seen a clown trying to entice them into the woods by promising them money. There was a weird story about the clown using a laser pointer to try to blind the kids. I don't know. Eventually, a mother called the police, and this turned into an entire countywide clown panic. Schools near wooded areas beefed up security, and had security guards placed on clown watch at the school perimeters. School districts sent letters to parents warning them to educate their kids about avoiding money-offering clowns. There were actually several arrests made amid the Greenville County clown panic. Some young men were arrested for threatening children while dressed as clowns, and for chasing kids while wearing clown costumes and masks. Like, they'd hide out at the bus stop. When the kids got off, they'd jump out and run down the road and chase them. I mean, it's most likely that these were just copycats who went out doing this once the story was such huge news, because otherwise there isn't a whole lot going on in Greenville County at the time. I mean, I'm sure there was, but it was just something for like teenagers to do. Someone called a school, caused it to shut down for a day when they called into the school to say if the school is open, that killer clowns would attack the students when school let out. So this is like calling it a bomb threat, but it's a clown threat. Another thing that happened was the local McDonald's suspended any Ronald McDonald visits to local McDonald's at the time. Crazy. An elementary school girl in Athens, Georgia got in trouble for bringing a big knife to school, and she said that she had brought it in case she was attacked by an evil clown. I mean, these are the kinds of real dangers that drum up when something like irrational clown sightings escalate into a full-blown panic. It's crazy. Then there was a report made to the police station by a few kids with their parents. This was back in Greenville. The kids said there was a creepy clown who lived in an old lakeside shack at the end of a long abandoned road in the woods. Sounds exactly like the beginning of a horror movie. Local police actually investigated, and they did find an old lake cabin where the kids said it was, but they didn't find anyone there, and no clown evidence. No clowns were ever associated with the cabin that we know of. It would be kind of funny, like a Scooby-Doo episode where they open the door to the cabin and find an old clown suit and a bunch of makeup. Anyway, how the stories of this sort of grow is that they evolve, and then if they reach the point where it goes on the news, now people are talking about it, and of course other people see it. We see this with sightings of UFOs. It happens. And the other thing is that one news story will become a news story for somewhere else, and then a morning talk show does a story about those stories, so the story becomes a story. This is one of the ways that a moral panic spirals. Now, we also have a few influential pop culture products that heavily influence the creepy clown panic. One of the main ones people tend to jump to is the Stephen King novel, It. But that novel came out in 1986, so it wouldn't have had any cultural effect on the first wave of creepy clowns in the news back in the earlier 80s, but it was a bestseller when it did hit the shelves. The TV specials and movies didn't come out until later. A TV miniseries with Tim Curry, starring as Pennywise the clown, in 1990, and the feature films we know today were in 2017 and 2019. Those are the big It movies, right? So once again, the main creepy clown panic was in 2016. So the widespread pop culture horror icon of the Pennywise we know today wasn't around yet, although the book was, and I guess the Tim Curry Pennywise from 1990 was. So yes, Stephen King's It no doubt had an effect on the zeitgeist and probably helped the second wave of 2016 creepy clown panic in ways, but the new incarnation from the movies we think of today, not so directly as it might seem. Support this show at therenegadefiles.com. It's your one location for bonus episodes, cool merchandise, episode archives, and all things Renegade Files at therenegadefiles.com. Okay, so on this subject of indirect influence, or maybe influence isn't 100% accurate here, this is more like something that informed the clown panic or has a place in the reasons people often feel uneasy about clowns, all of the modern horror connections aside. Part of this is the feeling of unsettling creepiness that has come to be called uncanny. This comes from the idea of the Uncanny Valley. If you remember that show Westworld about the robots, so it relates to animatronic features that tend to approximate humanity, but are ultimately not quite there yet, or not quite human. They go into this on the You're Wrong About podcast episode called Killer Clowns. Check that out. But the idea is that something artificial intended to approximate human life is scarier than a human bad guy because it lacks empathy. Sociopathic humans can lack empathy also, and while that can manifest in the most violent killers, it doesn't always have to. For example, a con man who has never and would never physically harm anyone might have no problem fleecing an elderly lady of her life savings because he lacks the empathetic response. But just because he has no empathy or no remorse about that doesn't mean that he'll become a murderer, even though a sociopath might very well be that also. The point is that a doll or a robot or an AI chatbot lacks many distinctly human emotions and reactions. And so this is the uncanny irony that makes a smiling doll scary. That sensation is part of what causes clowns to elicit our emotions of dread or fear. It's a subtle but interesting thing. It gets also into the definition of creepy, which I've talked about at length before, and it's creepy, we know, is something different than scary or horror. Creepy is the feeling that you're unsure if something is dangerous or not. Something that just looks out of place and isn't quite right. It gives you an uneasy feeling. There may be danger there, but you're not positive. Someone running at you with a butcher knife from an alley, that's not creepy. That's scary or terrifying or, a flee response, adrenaline. But someone standing in an alley with their arms crossed in a trench coat just staring at you when you walk by, that's creepy. Because it's potentially dangerous, but you're not really sure. And then when we get into the thing of like an old doll in a chair in a house they say is haunted, yeah, what's a doll gonna do? You know what I mean? I guess Chucky kind of ruined that for everybody and a few other ones, but I don't know. I don't have a terrible fear of dolls. What about you? Do you have a fear of dolls, or do you like dolls? People love dolls. I don't know. It's a thing. It seems like, I don't know if I should say this, but it seems like weird people love dolls. I'm not sure. That's not fair to say. But anyway, dolls are a thing, and they can be scary, I'll admit, or creepy. Anyway, so on the other side of the spectrum is a psychological phenomenon called supernormal stimuli. This is an effect that has been studied in birds and fish, where a bird who has a normal-sized, normally spotted egg is given a neighboring nest with an exaggeratedly large, giant spotted egg, and the bird will abandon their natural egg and sit on the bigger, prettier fake egg. It's a strange biological tendency to prefer an exaggerated version of something natural. Human preference is far too complex to make any blanket assumptions, but some people like the bigger, more dramatic versions, and some like medium and otherwise, and I'm not even going to go into all that. But the phenomenon of supernormal stimuli is where we get things like monster trucks and yachts you can get lost on. Let's just go with that. It's relevant here because the overly big smile and giant eyebrows and huge shoes of a clown's attire falls into this category of supernormal stimuli. We notice it. It's larger than natural life, and so on some level it becomes a standout. It gets our attention. And again, some of this is from the You're Wrong About podcast episode on the clown panic. You're Wrong About. It's good. Other pop culture influences include Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Remember that? Killer Clowns from Outer Space was a 1988 sci-fi comedy horror film. It was made by the Chiodo brothers, and the brothers also made all the costumes and special effects and props and did the makeup. The Killer Clowns, and that's clowns with a K, are these evil extraterrestrials. They look like weird clowns. They land on Earth. they sort of invade a small town, and their goal is to capture the human inhabitants for food. I mean, it's not like it's the greatest movie ever, but it is interesting in a lot of ways, partly because it's kind of cool that the guys did it themselves. It's interesting to see how they did the props and the special effects. The clowns have a gun that shoots popcorn. I know it's crazy, but it has become a cult classic, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. So that's 1988. And even if you didn't see the movie, back in those days, you probably saw the box in the video store, and it was maybe an advertisement on TV here and there or something, but it did put into the consciousness of the public this idea of weird clowns, at least a little bit. On a more theatrical note, we have the Joker character from the Batman, DC comics and films. The Joker is probably the most well-known example of a clown as a villain. The Joker in the Batman comics and movies confronts themes of hypocrisy, the marginalization of non-traditional members of society, but in the end, he's simply an agent of chaos, and he delights in destruction. This archetype has undoubtedly influenced broad cultural ideas, and the Joker was at least in the background for the entirety of all the creepy clown panics that we know of. Tap follow real quick wherever you're listening to stay connected and help this show thrive. So my summary, there's a few things going on here. Number one, the idea of a clown being bad or not entirely good is not new. Even from their origin, the earliest depictions of clowns often had a mischievous or an amoral or a sort of what could be said to be like negative bent. Some of them were downright murderous. That goes as far back as Punch in the 1800s. So these kind of ideas have been common since the beginning of clowns. This isn't like, oh man, clowns can be bad, isn't a new thing. Now, the other thing that has happened is in this 2016 moral panic where all of a sudden everyone was afraid of clowns. Do you remember it? I mean, it's I guess it's getting up there. You know, that was only 2016, 11 or so years ago. Do you remember when that was going on? It was weird, right? A clown was spotted. Oh, a clown was spotted. Like these clown spottings, like they're terrorists or something. And then, of course, it becomes like a way for someone to get on the news. I think that was a huge part of it. Obviously, it was. So you also have this situation where there was a gonzo promo of an indie film that sort of started out. I don't know how well that worked. That movie is like something like kicking 40. Well, what I'm not going to look, but it's got a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes. That's neither here nor there. If you see something like that now, you might even think, oh man, I bet that's a promo for some weirdo indie film. I guess back then that would have been more of a novel thing. This also happened during what might be considered slow news days, or it could have been like a way to distract from a new administration and, make a big splash about something nonsensical. There's a million reasons. These media trends and the ways that moral panic spread and snowball thanks to the news, and it's just an interesting subject. There's a cyclical nature to moral panics. If we look at subcultures and sociology, which is an article at Grinnell College, a moral panic, they tell us, occur when a perceived social problem sparks public concern and anxiety that leads to drastic measures being taken to solve these problems. Much of the information that triggers a moral panic is exaggerated and provided without sufficient context, or in the worst cases, completely false. So once again, this is from a paper called Subcultures and Sociology. And I'll put a link to this in the Dark Intel files on Patreon, and you can read it if you want. But, there's been these things that have come and gone. So, in the 50s, there was this moral panic about people riding motorcycles, or like the mod kids who rode scooters, and they all decorated their scooters and put a bunch of lights on them, and people were like, oh no. It's funny when you look back on it. The clown thing is funny when you look back on it. So there's the idea of the moral panic is also not something new. This goes all the way back to things like the Salem witch trials. That's in the late 1600s. there was one of my favorites, the comic book panic. That was in the 50s when comic books were thought to be, degenerate, and something that their graphic violence was going to corrupt the youth and lead to juvenile delinquency. And it's funny that there was what was called the comic code, and that was sort of a censorship mechanism that publishers enacted, or that governments enacted, that you weren't allowed to sell violent comics because comics were targeted to kids. So all these and you have to realize that was a huge thing. Comic books that depicted monsters like, the werewolf, Dracula, you name it, that became a gigantic thing. That's where we get those weird shows like the Addams Family and the Munsters. Those were sort of offshoots of the monster comics. And so what happened was these comic books went sort of really dark, and they just kept trying to outdo each other with creepier and more scarier stuff, and kids were having nightmares, and parents freaked out, and they sort of tried to stomp it out. So what they did is they made it against the law or against the comic code to put any kind of monsters or scary stuff in comics. And this became like the genesis of, or at least the popularization of, the superhero comic, because they were filled with good guys and the bad guys always lost, which would be in stark contrast to the early monster comics. But it also was the genesis for these horror magazines, because as weird as it sounds, you weren't allowed to make a comic book with monsters in it, but you could make a magazine with monsters in it. And what's the difference? One's stapled? I don't know. But that's a very weird moral panic, the comic book panic of the 50s. There was also the rock and roll panic, if you remember. Same kind of thing. The video games, remember that? 80s, 90s, video games, anxiety and criticism over violent video games. Of course, the big one is the satanic panic, 80s and 90s, with mixing in with Dungeons and Dragons. I guess there was a little bit of a goth panic in the 90s and 2000s, and parents were like, why is my kid wearing black all the time and hanging out in the graveyard with his friends? I know it's a little unsettling, but it's funny. It's like, did you ever see the episode of South Park where they have the goth kids and they're like, we're being goth to be different, and the one's like, well, how do I do it? Well, you got to be just like us. That sort of thing. There's the internet predator panic. Now that's probably justified, but then some of those other things probably are too. Concerns about the potential dangers of online predators, and then there's this kind of increased online surveillance a lot of times becomes the result of that, or regulation. These solutions, become I don't know. There's a million of them. But the point is that the clown panic of 2016, it sort of comes in. It's just one of a bunch. And it seems to be that every now and then society freaks out about something, and it's almost like the weirdness of it has no limits. Isn't it true? And some of them are justified, and some of them maybe not. So, just take a step back the next time everyone's jumping on a bandwagon and it seems to be they're afraid of something odd. There are odd things, and there are dangers in the world, but clowns probably aren't one of them. So thank you sincerely for investigating the creepy clown panic of 2016 with me. Subscribe or follow this show right now wherever you're listening, so together we can meet here again in a week and explore the craziest stories of UFOs, aliens, hauntings, ghosts, cryptids, conspiracy theories, unsolved mysteries, and weird social phenomenon. I am so glad to have you in the Renegade Files crew. And if you want to dive even deeper into the world of Renegade Files, join the Renegade Files agency on Patreon. It's how we drive the show, and we are really pushing hard to make that community fun. I built a lot of things for you there. You can check it out for free for a whole week. It's at patreon.com/renegadefiles. And as I said earlier, you can find that and everything else that you would love to know about Renegade Files at therenegadefiles.com. That's your one-stop shop. I made it very easy. Everything is upfront and obvious. So go check out therenegadefiles.com. You can find it all there. Grab some merch in our merchandise store if you want to represent on the street. And if you want to support the show and help me keep making these, then become an RFA agent on Patreon at patreon.com/renegadefiles. So thank you so much if you're an RFA agent there already. So do that and come check out everything I've made for you on Patreon, and come check out our website. It's free to look at, and I got a lot of cool stuff there. I have an archive of all the episodes. All those episodes have free player on them, and you can listen and share and represent. So until our next adventure, I'm your host, Lex Gordon. Stay wild, sonic boom child.